Only in America.
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 Welcome to Only in America. I'm Ali Noorani. This week, a photographer shares his experiences documenting the journey of Venezuelan refugees.
And so I've received dozens of emails from people all over the world that have seen it saying, look, I've tried to tell my friends what's happening and I've never been able to communicate it. And your photos do just that. They communicate it very well. For Venezuelans themselves, it's actually quite heartbreaking to see this.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani. What conditions lead someone to leave home? What possessions, comforts, or loved ones do they leave behind? When I spoke to writer and film critic Monica Castillo for Only in America last year, I asked her what immigrant stories aren't being told. And you know what? I often think about her answer. The daughter of Cuban immigrants, Monica explained the aspect of the immigrant journey that she wants to see more of.
I think we don't look at the point of leaving as often or as much. I only got to, for me coming to America, I always assumed it was a positive thing. Like, that's how I grew up. Seeing that affected my family, like, obviously going from living in a communist country and not having a lot of opportunities, or my grandfather having to work multiple jobs to get a very small living. Then you were able to come to the United States, learn trades, do things. I was able to go to college, all different things that probably would not have been possible back on the island. But I hadn't seen what that experience was like leaving until I went that first time in 2015. The day I got there, they just randomly announced that they were no longer going to allow doctors to leave the country. And my cousin is a doctor over there. And she had to basically get her things, say goodbye to her loved ones, and leave by the end of the week. She was able to appeal for an emergency visa out, and she left. But it was a really scary moment, and it was really sad. And I didn't know that sadness. I hadn't seen that sadness in the same way because I was just like, oh, no, this is a good thing. Like, you're going to America. It's fine. But no, it's really scary. And you don't know if you're going to see your loved ones again. And maybe this is goodbye. I haven't seen that story on the big screen.
Right. It's rare to hear the stories about why immigrants leave home. More typically, we hear about how immigrants arrive and how they adjust to their new country. Fact is, leaving is rarely, if ever, an easy decision. Leaving everything you know is often a last resort. And even if conditions at home have become unbearable, the decision to immigrate is one of sacrifice and loss. Now, most of us have never had to leave our own country. Perhaps our parents did, or our grandparents. But that may be as close as we get to understanding that experience. If we're going to create a more humane immigration system and a more just world, we need to figure out how we appreciate how complicated and multidimensional these stories actually are. Journalism is obviously one way to understand these journeys. Serving those who leave is another. But as we'll hear today, art captures the complexity of the decision to leave and the journey itself.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and strengthening international peace and security. And from Humanity United. When humanity is united, we can bring a powerful force for human dignity.
Felipe Jacome, a photographer focusing on issues of human mobility and human rights, has documented immigrant journeys and the reasons for them in a new project called Caminantes. Born in Ecuador, Felipe immigrated to the U.S. with his family as a teenager. He studied economics and later decided to pursue photography after producing a photo essay on a trip to Mexico's southern border. For this new project, Caminantes, Felipe layered portraits of Venezuelan migrants fleeing home over a background made of bolívares, Venezuela's currency. The juxtaposition, as he told me, is a sad irony. The bills depict national heroes, exotic birds, and nature scenes of the country that contrast starkly with images of migrants forced to leave their once prosperous homeland. The bills are also a powerful symbol of the country's political and economic turmoil. As inflation renders the colorful bolivares practically worthless, their imagery evokes both the power of these historical figures and the crisis that their nation now faces. In any one portrait, Felipe managed to capture the face and the story of the migrant and the story of why they left. Felipe and I spoke about conditions in Venezuela, migration in Latin America, and what he wants people to take away from his work.
I am from Ecuador. I actually came to the U.S. when I was about 15. With my family, we immigrated here as a result of financial and political crisis back in Ecuador. I did my studies here and I'm based here, and through my work, I travel a lot. This has continued to be my base. So yeah, it's been very interesting to work on issues of immigration abroad, being an immigrant in the U.S.
And tell me a little bit about your training and before you became a photographer.
Before I became a photographer, I didn't go to school for photography. I'm a trained economist.
Right.
And at some point while I was studying at the university, I got some research grants to go do some research for my undergraduate thesis. And I had money left over. And I told the professor, well, here's the money left over. And she said, well, it's off the book, so you can do whatever you want with it. I said, well, I can maybe do some research. And at the time, this was 2007, 2008, I wanted to go down to Mexico's southern border to see what immigration was looking like over there, because I had heard stories of immigrants that I had interviewed at the time. And she said, well, just go and take pictures. She knew I like to take pictures, so that was the first time I actually had to do a photo essay. Mm-hmm. I went there, and it was the first time that I actually had to put together a coherent photo essay. And it's all been downhill since then, because photography has kind of taken over a large part of my brain.
Do you miss economics?
No, not tremendously. But I think photography is just a tool, right? Photography is just a tool to get closer to people and to get the story on the ground. A famous photographer said that being a photographer, photography is an excuse to be in places where you normally wouldn't belong. So, me being an Ecuadorian that has already immigrated to the U.S., going to Mexico and jumping on the trains with undocumented migrants, it wouldn't be my place. I had the luck of immigrating to the U.S. legally with my parents, who were able to get a visa. I am now a permanent resident of the United States. So I've had this luck, tremendous luck, that most people in Latin America don't have. And so it allowed me to go and see what was their experience trying to reach the United States. So I didn't belong there, but photography was my excuse to be there and to use it as a tool.
Mm-hmm. So then one of the first pieces that I saw was your photo essay of La Bestia.
Yeah.
Was that same trip?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
So that was like your first project right there.
That was my first project.
Yeah.
And at first it was just, film camera. I had bought a digital camera and that cost me $600, but for that, for me, it was an incredible amount of money. So mm-hmm. I didn't even take it out of, my backpack, because I was too afraid that it's a dangerous place, so I could have gotten robbed. So most of it was film. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then I'm interested in what's going through your head at that point in time, because you started that project as an economics major, right? But all of a sudden you're asking people to take their photo as they're taking this journey. Was that difficult?
No. And I think most people in most places understand why you're there. There's some places where being a photographer is extremely difficult because people have seen too many photographers, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But there and then, we were talking about 2007, there was no coverage of La Bestia, and there was no coverage of trans-Mexican migration. I think the first time that the world really heard about this was 2005, when from the LA Times, Sonia Nazario...
I interviewed Sonia this summer.
Okay.
So author of Enrique's Journey.
Enrique's Journey. And Sonia, we've communicated over email, and sometimes she uses some of my photos for her presentations. So she did that back in 2005. Mm-hmm. I did that 2007, and since then it became an issue, mm-hmm. but it wasn't back then. So most people were quite aware of why you were there, and they understood. So mm-hmm. and most people were quite happy to speak.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you have this new project out now. Tell me a little bit how you found this community of Venezuelans and the process through which you decided you wanted to capture them?
About a year ago, I was back home in Ecuador, and we started seeing the massive arrival of hundreds of Venezuelans every day. And so with some friends, we got some food, we got some coffee, we got some blankets together, and we went to the parking lots where people were setting up, where we were sleeping on the floor, setting up little tents. And so we went there to try to help. And while we were there, this little girl gifted me an origami figure made out of money. And that for me was quite telling. For me, it became a clue into trying to imagine or understanding what was going on in Venezuela. I think from there, I decided that I knew that there was a lot that we were missing. I knew that most of us were not understanding what was going on in Venezuela and what was going on and what was for people to leave the country in such a massive exodus. We're talking about over 4 million people now.
Yeah.
And what had happened for money to stop being money, and what are the implications on the lives of the people. So I kept that origami figure and, I put it in my pocket and, I looked at it for months. And then I decided to do part of the journey walking out of Venezuela, to do part of the exodus, take photos, document. And then I wanted to show this link with the money and the devaluation of the currency, and to, kind of pay it forward what this little girl had done for me, to give me a little clue about what's going on in Venezuela. I tried to pay that forward to viewers. And so what I've done is I've learned how to do a silver emulsion transfer onto the money, right? So taking silver emulsion, which is the chemical that's on photo paper. Back in the day, you would go into the darkroom and you would take this paper that had photo emulsion from like a black bag, and you would expose it to light for a certain amount of time with a negative in the middle. And then you would have your image. You would develop it in the chemicals. So I've been doing that exact same process, except I've been coding the bills. So I've been pasting the bills, first 1 bill, then 3 bills, then 10 bills, and now hundreds of bills, making these large format photos that are transferred on top of the bills. And the bills themselves are quite beautiful. If anybody that's ever been to Venezuela has seen Venezuelan money. The Venezuelan money is strikingly beautiful, and you have a tremendous amount of different bills because they've gone through different currencies and different denominations for the currency due to inflation, and it continues to lose value. So they just print more bills and with different colors and different, or sometimes the same people on the bills but different colors or different denominations, more zeros, less zeros. When first they started with 2, then it was 2,000, and then it was 10,000, and so they go back and forth because it's such a crisis that the currency is not worth anything. So I'm not sure if I'm doing a great job at describing the process and what it looks like, but yes, it's a silver emulsion transfer on top of this money. And with the money, I play around making the different patterns. Essentially, when you reach scale, when you make them bigger, the bill stops being a bill and it becomes a pattern.
When I first saw them, the bills themselves look like distinct pieces of art. It's almost like you're transforming two pieces of art together. This one with this young man, as he's walking over the highlands, the figure on the bill is, this regal Venezuelan. It's almost like he's looking at that figure.
Yeah, and for me, it's been extremely fun, even to extremely interesting. Of course, there's a great element of tragedy, but to play with the irony of having the characters, the heroes of Venezuela on the bills. And also having on the other side, all the Venezuelan bills have animals and have the nature of Venezuela, because it's an extremely rich country, right? And so on one hand, the heroes of Venezuela, and we're talking about, the liberators of South America. Venezuelan money is called the Bolivar after Simon Bolivar, who liberated half of South America. And to have Bolivar next to the face of a migrant, next to the face of a child who has had to leave with his family, there is a great sense of irony. On one hand, this country's glorious past and, looking on to the sons and daughters of the country that are having to leave because the country is in ruins.
It's almost like the money at some level should always have value, but people are leaving Venezuela because the money has no value.
Correct.
Like you said, there's just tremendous irony and sadness in that.
There's tremendous sadness, and it's tricky. The distortions in the economy are hard to grasp.
Right.
I was talking to a friend from Venezuela that was in DC about a week ago, and she was saying that you go to the gas pump and you fill up your car and you essentially drive off. You don't pay for it because there's no money to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if you could give a tip to the person that puts the gas in your car, to the attendant there, but if you give him local money, he'll say, like, what do I want this for?
Right.
Right? The distortions are such that people can't even pay for gas, or the distortions are such that the bus fare is higher than what you would get paid per your day job.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Wow.
I've talked to many Venezuelan migrants on the road. One of them said, "Look, I've always been a rice farmer, but my little machine to cultivate the rice, it broke. Essentially, the timing belt broke,
Mm-hmm.
and just to fix that timing belt, which is a piece of rubber, said I would have had to sold 2 cars to buy a replacement for the timing belt for this motor."
Mm-hmm.
So what happens then to his rice production? What happens to the rice production of the country? What happens to the economy?
Mm-hmm. Did people want to return to Venezuela? The folks that you were talking to?
100%. I think that all of them want to go back. I don't really know how long this will take for the situation to get better, for them to go back. I think very few people are leaving Venezuela saying, I'm never coming back here. Everybody wants to leave, work, make some money so they can feed their families. And when the situation gets better, they will go back.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's a conflicting narrative with, I guess, the general narrative of, waves of immigrants coming because they want to come for the American dream. But, and sure, a lot of people want to come to the US, but it's for a better life. And most of them come back, or most of them will keep strong links and will keep sending money.
It's almost like people want to come to the US, but they don't want to leave their home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I'm looking at this photo, I'm also wondering is this your kind of subconscious way of going back to your economics training?
I have to say that having some kind of economics training is definitely helpful, understanding what's behind this, what's behind inflation and how that happens. But no, I think I've become just more of a visual anthropologist, if anything, over the years. Yeah.
How have the photos been received? What's an interesting response you've gotten?
I have never produced a photo series that has been so well received and has been so impactful. I think that as a photographer, people in the industry are kind of troubled on because most photos are not impactful or don't have the impact that they used to, just because there is so much photography out there and we're so overexposed to images, so we kind of lost our sensitivity. But these, I think, by the fact that by giving them an additional layer, then this layer of the money, it makes people think. It takes an extra element, makes people think a little bit more. And so I've received dozens of emails from people all over the world that have seen it, saying, look, I've tried to tell my friends what's happening and I've never been able to communicate it.
Mm-hmm.
And your photos do just that. They communicate it very well. For Venezuelans themselves, it's actually quite heartbreaking to see this. And it's strange because I don't think it's the case for every country, but somehow Venezuelans had a very close relationship with their currency. Historically, it was a very strong currency.
Mm-hmm.
In the 70s and the 80s. In fact, my parents' family in the 70s and 80s moved to Venezuela because it was kind of like the South American dream, because they left Ecuador to Venezuela looking for better opportunities. And so for Venezuelans, it's quite hard for them. They're quite nostalgic about somehow it's a strong symbol for them. Their currency has always been a reason of pride, of identity, a source of identity. So looking at these and looking at the images has been quite tough. And I've shown them, and to see Venezuelans be really shocked and their eyes well up, because they're completely heartbroken. So this touches a chord somewhere in there in a strange way.
Do you think is the currency in these photos similar to the train the migrants were riding in your La Bestia series?
Are the photos or the currency?
I'm sorry, in the currency. Because what I'm getting at here is that when I saw those pictures that you took in 2007, the element there is a train taking people from point A to point B to get to a better place.
Right.
So it's almost, the photos are somebody sitting on a train or in that infrastructure. And these are photos of people pasted onto their currency. As I've been looking at this, there's a similarity there that I can't quite articulate.
I mean, they're both photo essays on an exodus. I think the motivations are similar. The Venezuelan case of the economic aspect of the crisis is quite unique. It's quite unique in modern history. Maybe you can talk about Zimbabwe, but having a country that has collapsed to such an extent, having such a rich country that has collapsed to such an extent without a terrible war, you've never really seen it. To have 2,000,000% inflation, you haven't really seen that, not to that extent. We have had economic crises and inflation in other countries. For example, Argentina, in the 90s, Peru. There have been many countries that had economic and financial crises that had very high rates of inflation. But in Venezuela, it's accompanied by the fact that they don't produce anything anymore. So it's not just that the money has lost value, they've stopped producing. So there's no food, there's no, medicine, there's even, very basic stuff, toilet, everything has stopped, has collapsed. And that's why the path for recovery in Venezuela is going to be so difficult, because it's not just, okay, here's a new currency, let's go back to normality. It's that the country is completely collapsed.
So let's say the show is being presented in the middle of the U.S., in a red state, if you will. What do you hope that somebody walking in to that space and seeing these photos, what do they take away from this? And this is a person who has concerns or questions about immigration. For me, the objective of this piece and using, I could have just, taken these portraits and shown them as I took them, just a photo, but the fact that I've gone through the trouble and the work of putting them on money, for me, is paying it forward. I received this origami figure from a little girl, and that for me was a way to be more interested or try to understand or try to imagine what's going on over there. So hopefully a person, anybody, red state, blue state, doesn't matter, that sees this person. It could be an American, it could be people back home in Ecuador, because there's also, tremendous attitudes of xenophobia and in response to the arrival of Venezuelans in Colombia as well, in Peru as well, Chile, like all of South America, you're starting to see xenophobia. And in countries that it's like, we're migrants ourselves. Like there's 500,000 Ecuadorians in Spain, probably another 500,000 in the US. I don't know. And yet we have these xenophobic, we have these strong negative attitudes to people arriving and blaming everything on them. So it's it's a tool. It's a tool to get people to think about it. Well, it's amazing. It's just it is pretty remarkable. What's next for you?
Well, fingers crossed. I'm saving some money right now. I will try to go back to the Venezuelan border where I started my journey and where I started taking these photos. And what I would like to do is produce more of these photos large scale. Right now, I'm limited by the number of bills, because I live in the US, but I can't exactly bring boxes of bills of currency. That it may not have value, but of course some eyebrows would be raised if I try to walk in with like a trash bag full of money, worthless money. So I would go there to make some of these boards with large scale. So and hopefully make a mural also through silver gelatin transfer into some kind of a mural or into a lot of these big photos to be able to produce kind of like a large scale exhibit.
The last question for you. Name of the podcast is Only in America. And so the question is just if you could please finish this sentence. Only in America, ...
Oof, that's a tough one. I'm blanking out because, I mean, everything that's happening in the US when it comes to migration, it's also happening in other places. And there is the need for people to become more sensible and more educated. So, yes, only in America, if we're talking about the US, it's a great country full of opportunity. But when it comes to, I mean, we're living a time when it comes to migration, that's happening all over. So I can't say only in America we need to learn about this, or only in America we're seeing a crisis. No, the crisis is general, and perhaps what my work does is to show a crisis that doesn't directly affect the US, but it's a massive exodus that's just a little bit south.
Yeah. So it's almost like only in America almost doesn't apply at this moment.
I don't think in this particular case.
Yeah.
I don't think in this particular case.
That was a very good answer. No, thank you very, very much. I really, really appreciate this. And again, the work is just beautiful. So thank you. Felipe Jacome is a photographer. His new project is titled Caminantes. You can find more information on Felipe at our website, immigrationforum.org. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to Only in America. Our podcast is produced and edited by Emily Chow, Joanna Taylor, and Megan Wetmore. Kathleen Farrell is the executive producer. I'm Ali Narani. Thank you for listening to Only in America, and I will talk to you next week.